So this is a bit of a how-to on the Gstar-EX video camera, used specifically for asteroidal and lunar occultation timing. Of course, the camera's a pretty useful tool for all sorts of things, but this video is really about just narrowing it down those settings for those occultation times. It's a particularly sophisticated camera. It has a lot of settings. It makes it very powerful, but it's easily possible to get lost in them. So let's just go through a few of the basics. On the screen at the moment, you can see a random bright star. It's pointing over to the west somewhere, and it just happens to put the telescope at a handy position so I can actually get my hand on the front to play with those buttons. And at the bottom, you've got IOTA VTI, video time inserted GPS time, which is what we'd normally see with occultation timing, or you might use a different time insertion device. And normally I wouldn't actually manually change the camera. One of the most useful aspects of the Gstar is that it has an RS-232 interface which goes straight into the computer, and there's a wonderful program which has been provided free by my Astro Shop and Steve Massey that allows access to all of those settings from the computer. So you wouldn't normally go next to it if you've put it into a permanent observatory. But if it's still finger driven, this is how it's going to work. So there's got the 5 buttons on the back, and I'll find the middle one, which is effectively the enter button, and there we go, and that pops up the menu. So the first thing that's flashing is title. Now, it is possible to put a little title on the top. It'll just sit on one of the 4 corners. I think you can actually change that, but it's not necessary, so we're going to just go on by it. The sensor. Now, this is the mainstay of an integrating camera. Now, a video camera works at 25 frames per second if it's PAL. If it's the NTSC American standard, it's working at 30 frames per second. These are interlaced cameras, they're interlaced video, and the interlaced bit means that it actually, for every single frame, takes 2 exposures. It takes every other line, and then every other line again. So it actually takes 2 things called fields, and it stitches them together to make a single frame. So it's actually taking, for PAL, which is what we'll be discussing here, is 50 fields per second. And that's important because on the Gstar system, which is different to the WATEX system, the Gstar system, it measures the integrations in fields, not in frames. So playing with that menu, I can start to do an integration. So that's 2 fields integrated. And you can see that the star in the center between the menu has got a little bit brighter. And I'll do a little bit again, and it starts again, and it'll get brighter still. I'll just take it up to 12. Now, remembering that there's 50 in a second, 12 is getting up there. It's getting up there for a bit over 1/4 of a second. And now you can see that there are a lot of other stars in the field because it's a longer exposure. You can see the effects of scintillation have actually blurred those stars out, and then, in fact, it looks a little bit out of focus as well, but that's not to worry. So there you can actually see that it's taking a number of fields or frames to create a single image. Now, that allows us. Now that's our primary area in which we're going to, adjust the magnitude depth of our field of view. So I'll set that back down to 0. I'll pop onto the next function. ALC and ELC. Now, video cameras are designed not to have telescopes attached to them or to be attached to telescopes, but to have normal CCTV lenses attached to them. And there's two sorts. There's the sort which is most like a telescope. It's just a simple straight-through lens. And there's another slightly more sophisticated type, which has an iris, an electronic iris in it, which allows it to sort out the light levels. It's not looking at the night sky. Normally these things are looking at bright daylight, and the fluxes in light from the sun and clouds and whatever mean that they have to do quite a lot of work to stop overexposing. ELC is electronic light control, okay, and that's for those lenses which have no iris. Okay, we don't need to know. We don't use ELC. Never use ELC. It's very rare that we want to use ELC. And basically, it will be adjusting the level all of the time. So when you get a nice bright object, it will make it dimmer again, and it just messes up everything. So we only use ALC, which it probably stands for something like automatic light control, and that's for the iris cameras. Of course, we don't have an iris, but it works much better. Now, however, there is a however. If I click on that, underneath that, so that was doing a central click to get the menu underneath ALC. Make sure it's set to ALC first of all. That's how it comes by default, and just leave it there. Click on the menu, and you've got two settings in there. One of them is the shutter setting. So that's this electronic kind of shutter. It's a make-believe thing. It's not a real shutter as a DSLR would have. And for faint events, that's always going to be set to off. Okay. If you're looking at a bright event, so you're looking at a very bright star on a lunar occultation, or the sheer brightness of the moon's limb is such that it's flooding the field of view, then you can actually set the shutter to, oops, wrong one. This is hundredths of a second or 2/80 of seconds, so that's a quarter of a second. So these are, I believe, it's milliseconds. And you can see that now that I've really taken very, very short exposures, that star's almost disappeared. But it's still there, so if you're doing a lunar exposure and the limb's bright, you can use that. You can use that to good effect. Okay. I'll switch that back to off. If you're doing an asteroidal occultation, in almost every single case it's going to be off, because you're going to be using that sense-up function. You're not going to be wanting to take, sub millisecond exposures. You're going to want to take long exposures. Now underneath there's another function called level, and this is part of the ALC function overall, that it wants to stop being a CCTV camera. It wants to stop overexposing. Okay, so normally it's the levels when out of the box. Oops, let's get back up there. Is set somewhere in the middle to stop it overexposing. Just set it up to the top there. It really doesn't make much difference in most circumstances. It actually hampers very long integrations and stops them happening if it gets too bright. So just set it up the top and leave it there and never touch it again. That'll be fine. So there we go. In the ALC, the important setting is the shutter. And you can only see the shutter speed, which should be off for asteroidals. Or you can use a faster shutter speed for brighter objects, such as lunar occultations of bright stars. So that's it. as an important menu. It's important to get that level set to maximum, which is 8, and the shutter set to off if you're doing asteroidals. If you're not looking at bright events, you're never going to have to touch that setting again. You just ignore it. Just leave it as it is. Okay, backlight compensation. That's what the BLC stands for. Set to off. Not interested in BLC. It's a little bit advanced. I will show you what that's all about a little bit later on. AGC stands for automatic gain control. Gain is just straightforward amplification. It's a linear function. It just basically amplifies the signal right across that whole chip. Now, we're control freaks. We don't want the video camera to be doing stuff, you know, for itself. If you're a video camera looking in a car park or looking out on a street, then you want it to be just working. You want it to be working hard to get that data right for that situation. But we're astronomers. We want it to be right for our situation. We're going to make it do it by hand. So AGC is set to manual. And again, clicking on that menu, we can look in and we'll see the level. And the level is the level of the amplification. So it's set to 0 there, and I can increase it. Now you can see each time I increase it, yes, the stars get brighter, but you're introducing noise. Okay, so you get brightness, but at the expense of noise. So that might not be a big issue. If there's plenty of signal, then you don't mind too much noise. And you might leave it at, say, 5, just as your default. White balance, W-V. Doesn't make a blind bit of difference on this camera because it's a black and white camera. If it's a color camera, then that's important. On a black and white camera, it doesn't really matter what you set to. Similarly, that's the internal syncing for the time signals, I believe, for the video. Just ignore it. I'll come back to options. That's a whole new menu structure. Zoom is on. Let's turn zoom off. It didn't make a big difference because I hadn't got any actual zoom in. It's a function which you don't need to use. You should set it to off, and I'll set it off on the way. You can see that if I zoom in, it can basically double. It just basically, it literally combines those pixels and shows a big image. It's a digital zoom. It doesn't achieve anything whatsoever. So I'll switch that off. Motion detection, I will set to off. Motion detection signal, when you have it connected into an RST32 interface, just allows the camera to automatically save stuff when it sees a robber going past the camera, past the shop window at night, etc. Nothing to do with us. Set it off, and pop back up to artificial satellite, and then have a look at the options menu. Now these masks are quite interesting. We're not going to use them. They're very seldom used. They do have some function. They're there to block out street lights. Right? Got a street light there, and you've got this really, really bright light, and that massive bright light is flooding all of the pixels with photons that you don't want. You can block it out. So it's not something that we're interested in. Positive and negative basically show black on white or white on black, so you do that. As we said, it freaks out my image capture device, so I'm not going to bother showing you. Just leave it as normal. Quite useful to set. You'll never set again unless you need to. Horizontal rev and vertical rev. Now, the astronomical standard is to have north at the top and east over on the left hand side, so opposite, left right flipped, and that's how I take all my video images, so that they have north at the top and east over to the left hand side. The Gstar allows you to swap vertically and horizontally, so that you can change those settings just to work better with the setup you've got. Priority, freeze, is field or frame. We're not in the business of doing freezes. It basically just shows the same image forever. So we'll ignore that. It's irrelevant to us, regardless of the setting. Here's another setting which is very much designed for the car park security camera rather than the astronomical camera. You can determine whether it does the sense up accumulation before it applies the gain, or you can have it do the gain to each frame before it does the sense up. The theory is that you can see in the car park situation better detail of number plates if you do the sense up before the gain. It really doesn't make much difference. I leave it at sense just to make sure that you get the best possible timing out of the system. Now, gamma, which is the final setting, is a little bit. It's a little bit like gain. It's an amplification of the signal going over the field. The difference being it's non-linear. Basically, it gets the mid-tones. It gets the. If you're looking at the nebula, you'll see more nebulosity. You'll see the fainter stars. Now, if I turn the gamma to 1, you'll see a lot less on the field. You'll see the brighter stars, and then you can use other settings to get them back again. I tend to leave it by default at 0.45. Now, technically speaking, of course, because it's non-linear, if you're going to do photometry, as in the differential in light between one star and another, seriously, then you're damaging your data because you're using a non-linear mathematical function on that. But to be honest, I'm doing astrometry. I'm interested in positional and, of course, light flux differences, which are relative rather than absolute. So I'm quite happy to leave it at 0.45. If you've got loads and loads of light to spare, then you can switch it to back to 1. Okay, so I'll go back to the settings. Now, rather than have me mucking around with the actual physical buttons, I'm going to move back down to the comfort of my observatory chair and use the actual Gstar program to show you a couple of things. Okay, so we've said that by and large there's only really 2 settings you're going to play with. Okay, for the fainter events, you're going to play with the gain, which is, let's say, that straightforward amplification of the signal, and you're going to play with sense up, which is the integration of the signal, possibly with gamma. Now, looking at that bright star in the center now, we have the gain set to 0. So I will just set that gain to 8. And we can actually see plenty of other stars in the background. Now, since we've been talking, the focus has drifted off sufficiently far to. So that's with gain to the max, gamma at 0.5, and sense up off. Okay, and we're looking at stars which, in the 14-inch that we're looking at, these smaller stars that you're seeing are probably around the 13th magnitude. I mean, it goes pretty deep with those settings with plenty of gain. And when one is trying to see a faint occultation, they're probably about the best settings. The noise which you can see as a result of the gain is frustrating, but it allows you to get the very, very, very best time resolution. So with sense up off, you're getting the ability to see the time resolution to a single field, a 50th of a second, more practically a single frame, which is 25th of a second. Now, of course, if it's too noisy or too faint, then you can start going on sense up. So I'll just show it to 6 times, which is 3 frames integration. And all of a sudden you can see all of those stars much, much, much more visible now. Okay, seeing still pretty bad, so there's a lot of blurring through the scintillation. And also the noise levels have gone up quite badly. So you might just adjust the gain down just a bit to check the noise levels. And when you do adjust the gain down, it starts the sense up from the beginning again. So just go through that cycle each time. And there you've got a much less noisy picture, but you can see quite readily those fainter stars. So when you're doing an asteroidal occultation, all of the time, you're just balancing that out. You're just balancing out the gain level from around between 5 and 8 or 4 and 8, or the middle and max if you're using the manual system, and the sense up. So your ideal is to keep the sense up as low as possible, but you need to have a good signal. You know, when you're looking at one of those stars, you need to have a good, strong signal, so that if there is anything interesting other than the simple position of that star, so if that star turns out a bit double, or if you're looking at, say, Pluto or Eris or one of those the dwarf planets, and you want to measure the atmospheres, then you need to have plenty of signal so that you can see the light gently dipping off rather than just being too blocky. Okay, so as if by magic, a few hours later, here we are on a lunar occultation, of a star by the moon, and this is a double star. And I'll explain the settings that I've got. I'll also move the target a little bit more central, for no other reason as I like to have it as close to the center as possible. Of course, if that dark, or the bright limb gets too much, then put the star where you need to get the star. So the settings I've got, it's on ALC, exposure to off, level on 8, I've got the gain set to 0, so switched off altogether, and I've got the gamma set to 1, which is the lowest setting. So if I set the gamma to 0.45, which is where I'd normally have it for an asteroidal occultation, you can see that it's quite overdone. And in this particular case, you can see just by setting the gain up to 2 just how much it's improving, or it's overdoing in this particular case the light. So I'm going to switch it down. I think that's quite bright, so I might knock it down. That's probably a little bit too much. There we go. That's to 1/120th of a second. I just want it to be a little bit less light so I don't overexpose that star. I suspect it's overexposed as it is, which gives it the risk of not measuring a double particularly well. But let's see what happens. It's about to go pop. So a few more seconds and it will disappear. There it goes. It looked pretty steep, and we'll be able later to reduce that and to see if we can see the presence of a double star. So just as a quick way of recap, we set the exposure by default to off, and the levels, and that's AG, so the ALC is set to off for the exposure, and the level set to the maximum right across the end of 8. AGC, which is the gain, which is the amplification if you like, was set somewhere in the middle to about 5-ish. We'll set the gamma, which is on the options menu, to 0.45 to start with. It doesn't get changed very often, but it's there. It's on that options menu if you need to. And we'll set the sense up to off, and that's where we'll start. Okay. And from that, the rest of the night is going to be balancing the exposure settings, the ALC settings. You'll probably never have to go to unless you're doing lunar occultation work, or you want to look at the bright planets where you need to really stop the light down. Most of the time, we'll just be balancing the sense up, the integration levels, and the gain, just to get the right level of time versus noise on the signal. And again, we'll probably find that you'll set gain to 8, and you'll just check the sense up. See, in that particular occasion, I've got bags of light for that bright star. You know, I won't need gain 8. I'll just turn it right down, and you can see that you're going to get a much better image. So, Gstar settings in a nutshell. There's a lot of them. There's plenty to be learned, and there's plenty to get confused about. But really, the day-to-day settings are actually very few. Most of the settings on the Gstar you'll just set and forget, and one or two others, as they sense up and gain, are the things that you'll use all of the time.